My nephew was killed about a year ago, and myself and my sister, his mother, and his brothers, we went to court and we advocated for the person who killed my nephew, and asked the court not to. First of all, we tried to do a restorative process, and we reached out to the family of him, and really built relationships. And so together with his family and my family, we stood in front of the courts and asked for no prison time. So it's not just sitting back and letting things happen. It's really intervening in those kinds of situations and say there's a better way, and a way that brings healing and peace, not only to the person who did the harm, but more importantly, to the person who was harmed and or their families.
Rita and Fidel Ramos, Juan Ponce Enrile was the defense minister at the time. And then Fidel Ramos was the chief of staff of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. They said that they believed that there was cheating in the elections, and they said that they believed that Cory Aquino won. That was also very powerful. And, they went to EDSA because the Armed Forces of the Philippines office, is located in EDSA. So Jaime Cardinal Sin, he was the Archbishop of Manila at the time, used Radio Veritas, the Catholic radio station, in announcing to the people, please go to EDSA and support and protect, Enrile and Ramos, because, they actually closed down the television, that is not owned by government. So they could not broadcast, on television. The only one that was running was the Philippine government TV station. So we had to use, so Cardinal Sin had to use that radio station to make that announcement, and people actually were just like holding their radios, their transistor radios everywhere, just listening to Radio Veritas, because we really got all the news, from Radio Veritas, and Bomber Radio. So it's from the radio. So it was like a common sight, people walking with transistor radios, because that's where we got the news from. Because of course this was 1986, there was no internet. There was not even an SMS, texting, so there were no cell phones at this time. When Cardinal Sin, called for people to mass at EDSA, I didn't know what to do. I froze at home, with my transistor radio. Okay, how do I tell now this family that I'm leaving, I'm going to EDSA? Because there were no classes. Classes were suspended. I could not tell them that, I'm going to class, because there were no classes. And so I stayed in my room and I started to cry, just cried and cried and cried, because I felt so helpless. I wanted to go to EDSA because it's something I fought for years, and it is happening, and I couldn't be there. And so when lunch, when I was called for lunch, I did not go out because I was like crying and crying in my room. And so my dad, who was the member of Congress, went to my room and said, my child, I know what you believe in. So if you want to go to EDSA, go. Wow. He said, are you sure, Dad? And then he said, of course, that's your political view. That's what you believe in. So just go, get the car. I'll ask the driver to drive you there. And I said, no, Dad, the driver is being paid for by this government. I'm not going to use your driver. I said, I'm going to go there through public transportation. So that's what I did. So I was in EDSA every day until actually Marcos left the country.
Non-violent is better than the violent campaign. So I wrote an article around that just to state that to the people in Fiji that a violent campaign is not the way to go, and it does not bring forward development movement in Fiji. And and to state that the non-violent campaign is the better way to go. So when I came back, I called together our Catholic politicians, specifically to tell them about what the church teaches about non-violence. And in that, and I discussed with them, although that news about civil unrest in Fiji is said to be a fake news, but somebody is making that fake news, and that somebody, has plans behind it to bring about, instability or to cause civil unrest, and I'm sure. And I told our Catholic politicians that I'm sure that people are already framing something where the church stands in terms of violent campaigns, and how the church should stand by the non-violent campaign that is practiced by Jesus and other non-violent practitioners. And I told them that, as you talk to your political parties, communicate to them, make sure that you bring your faith to your party decisions in terms of responding to civil unrest or whatever your strategy is behind this alleged fake news or civil unrest, to make sure that you stand by your Catholic faith.
Number of people, the stories are stories of people, for example, like Angelina Atiam, whose daughter is abducted in northern Uganda in the fighting between the Lord's Resistance Army and the government. And out of that, in a way, leads a movement of forgiveness, and is calling on both the government and the rebels to say no to war, to say no to fighting, that fighting can never be the solution. And kind of proposing this invitation of forgiveness as another way of life being possible. And she galvanizing a whole community into these practices of forgiveness. She's real, and she's showing us that another way is possible. Christians like Maggie, who survives the genocide and welcomes these orphans, both Hutu and Tutsi, into a new spirit of love and forgiveness and non-violence. But that is also connected with different forms of practical engagement. So she's helping them to build a farm, schools, hair salons, very everyday practical engagement. So non-violence is not just kind of saying no to violence. It's creative in that it's inviting us to engage in a way everyday forms of living that bear witness to that self-sacrificing love of God.
Another of the main non-violent actors are the relatives of disappeared people that in a 90% are women that are searching truth, justice, reparation and non-repetition all over the country in hundreds of local and regional groups that work together in nets and try to do by themselves what the state they understood it wouldn't do. That we think is a non-cooperation, autonomous, non-violent way of action. Very, very important. The biggest part of them, they were not activists. They were simple, ordinary people of the social order that they found with a so pain situation, and they decided to put their body in the field, in the struggle, and not waiting others do that for them. And now the stage of this struggle is the forensic identification, because they found thousands of bones and of objects, but they don't know if they are of their relatives and familiars or they are of other people. So they have a double pain because they have the bones, but they don't know of whom they are. So it's very important to have a big social support of churches, universities, artists, intellectuals, to make a pressure over authorities for hurrying up the forensic work.
There is a pipeline that was going to be built across the land of some sisters, sisters of the Adorers of Christ. And, you know, they were, of course, there was a little bit of tension between the company that wanted to build the pipeline and questions of whose land it was. And so the sisters, in a very creative act, decided to build an outdoor chapel on the land where there is supposed to be a pipeline. And I mean, I just find that is like a, you know, what a beautiful way to resist is by doing something which is a natural expression of their charism, which is to pray. And so that got a lot of news. Is just kind of like, you know, this is how the sisters were gonna live out their values.
A rural indigenous village that whose natural resources has been destroyed by a stone quarry that's digging gravel and rocks from the river. So through our Caritas team, we are educating and helping this village to find a non-violent way of protecting their natural resources, and at the same time to find a way of speaking or stopping this company from exploiting their river and destroying the environment and even the village and the village people themselves.
Our board member, Yeb Sanyo, who used to be the former climate negotiator for the Philippines. And in thinking about the principle of nonviolence, of how like voluntary sacrifice can really move hearts, I was thinking of how in 2013, the most powerful typhoon hit the Philippines, Typhoon Haiyan. It killed thousands of people, displaced, you know, millions. And during that typhoon, it was the climate negotiations were going on in Krakow, and Yeb Sanyo was there representing the Philippines. And once he got that news, like, you know, he just broke, because here was, you know, for years, countries had been meeting year after year trying to find, you know, to come to some kind of agreement, and nothing had taken place. And here's the realities of the typhoons and climate crisis hitting this country. And he just broke down, and he cried in a public forum, and he decided to fast. And he fasted for, I think it was like 2 weeks, to kind of just like raise awareness and call for urgency. And his vulnerability and his decision to voluntarily suffer through fasting, like, rang across the world. It really moved hearts as people could finally kind of get a sense of the urgency and what was at stake, simply because of this nonviolent act that Yeb did by agreeing to sacrifice.